Hi, welcome back to Wildlife Prospects. I'm your host Chloe Martin and I will be joined this week with special guest Melody Smith. Melody is an Arctic landscape and species conservative and she is here this week to provide us with an in-depth knowledge about our focus animal of the week, the polar bear. Thanks for joining us today, Melody.
No problems, thanks for inviting me.
So Melody, many of our younger viewers watching today may never have seen a polar bear in Australia. Could you explain why this is?
Well, Chloe, the polar bear is also known as the king of the Arctic, and this is because the polar bear only lives in the Arctic, where temperatures drop well below freezing. But this is okay for the polar bear because their body has unique features which enable it to live comfortably in these temperatures. Unfortunately, these features would also cause the polar bear to overheat if they moved to Australia, because it's just so much warmer here than the icy Arctic.
Wow, yes, it is amazing how they can survive in those temperatures. You mentioned that they have unique features to help them survive in this environment. Could you explain these?
Yes, well, the polar bear is a marine mammal, and they spend much of their time on the Arctic sea ice where they'll be searching for their next meal, which is more than likely going to be a big fat seal. To survive these harsh environments on the ice, their fur is a lot thicker than any other bears, and that even covers their feet for warmth, and it helps with traction on the ice. They also have a thick layer of blubber, which is fat, underneath their fur. And this provides them with greater buoyancy and insulation, which means that they're not going to drown and they're not going to freeze when they go on the icy sea. They also have very large flat feet, which are very oar-like, which make them excellent swimmers. These are only some of the adaptations that allow them to live in this icy environment.
That's fascinating. So, is it possible for anyone to own a polar bear as a pet?
No, I wouldn't recommend it. A male polar bear can grow to 3 meters tall and weigh over 500 kilograms. So if it happens to land on you, it's much like getting crushed by a car. Other than the obvious factor of pure size, the polar bear simply isn't made to be domesticated into a pet. Their behaviour is too radical and unpredictable, and they lack some of the 6 requirements for domestication.
So what are the 6 requirements of domestication, and how are the polar bears missing these requirements?
So the 6 requirements of domestication include not being a picky eater, so they need to be able to eat foods that are easily accessible for humans. They also need to be able to mature quickly because humans have limited lifespans, so they don't want to waste time on feeding and caring for an animal that's going to outlive them. They also need to be able to breed in captivity, so animals that require a certain territory or courtship rituals don't really make good for domestic pets. They also need to be docile by nature, which means they need to be nice to humans. And they cannot have a strong tendency to panic and flee. If they do, they probably won't go near the humans and they won't make for good pets. They also need to conform to social hierarchy, so they need to be able to realise that humans are their strong leader and they need to be able to do whatever they need to do for them. The polar bear fits into the categories of not being a picky eater, as they will essentially eat any meat they're given if they're hungry enough. They'll also eat maturity within 2 to 3 years, so this is not a problem. They'll also conform to a social hierarchy, as they recognise the leader of a small pack and they don't have a tendency to flee or panic. However, polar bears are not docile by nature and will only look at humans as another piece of meat every time if they're hungry enough. They are also very ineffective breeders in captivity, with no offspring ever making it past a couple of years and none have ever been released into the wild as yet.
So because we can't own a polar bear as a pet and they're obviously not an Australian animal, should we still care for them and their well-being?
Yes, we definitely should. Even if these animals are not in the public eye every minute of the day, we should still care for what happens to them. Do you know what's going on up there at the moment, Chloe?
No, I don't think I do. Why don't you enlighten us?
The Arctic is melting. All the sea ice that the polar bears depend on for food and to find their next meal is melting all around them. They're having to swim miles upon miles in order to find food. And this might sound okay to you and I, but this is not okay for the polar bear. By swimming everywhere, they're using nearly 5 times as much energy as what they usually would by walking to their meal. And majority of the time, they don't even find it when they're swimming to it. This is causing them to lose weight exponentially,
and more polar bears are starving to death every day. And this is such a serious issue, Chloe. They are what I like to call an umbrella species, which means that a lot of other species depend on them via a food web. For example, the Arctic fox depends on the polar bear for food, as they will eat the leftover carcass of the dead seal after the polar bear is done. And without the polar bears eating the seals, the seal population might increase, and this in turn will affect the fish population, and so on, so on. So if you're still asking yourself, should I really do something about this? Look at it from a human point of view. Polar bears are an extremely dangerous carnivore, and they pose a massive threat to humans and their properties. So as climate change causes sea ice to melt, the hungry polar bears have nowhere else to turn to but to local villages in the hopes of finding more food. So in the past few years, polar bear conflicts have risen dramatically due to instances just like this. Another reason to care about the polar bears is the overall notion of biodiversity. So biodiversity refers to the number of different species. Another reason that there's so much focus on polar bears is because they get attention of the public. They serve as sort of an ambassador species for what's happening in the Arctic now. They serve as a gauge to measure the effects of climate change in the Arctic. Well, that's all the time we've got left for today. Thank you to Melody Smith for coming in today and informing us all on the polar bear. Make sure you tune in next week where we'll be talking about the beaver. Thank you and good night.